I've had the pleasure of meeting a lot of parents throughout my career, and I've learned a lot from them about not only how to teach their child and to reach their child and to love their child, but that's helped me to love and teach other children.
Today's guest, Colleen Russell-Rawlins, holds the rare distinction of having led two of Canada's largest school districts in Toronto and Peel. She is a leader who embodies intelligence, eloquence, and humility, a combination I wish I saw more often in education and, quite frankly, in business too. I first met Colleen several years before she became the director of Peel, back when she was a superintendent overseeing a group of schools in Toronto. At the time, I was spearheading an implementation of a digital math tool in the TDSB, and like most initiatives in the size of a district like Toronto, it was complex. And the undertaking required the cooperation of lead teachers, math coordinators, principals, IT staff, and, of course, superintendents. Colleen's support throughout the process was really marked by grace, generosity, and an ability to bring people together, all hallmarks of great leadership. I was excited to talk to Colleen about her experiences growing up in the very city and district she would one day lead. There's something that's inspiring to me about the story of a homegrown talent, the idea of someone returning to their roots to make an impact on the community that shaped them. And in the world of education, few roles are as significant as leading the TDSB, with its 582 schools and enormous influence on Canada's education system. In our conversation, Colleen reflects on her childhood, sharing stories of resilience in the face of racism, and the invaluable lessons she learned from her grandmother and mother about overcoming adversity. We also dive into a range of important topics, including what it's like to lead large school districts, the role of trustees in shaping policy, advice for parents navigating the education system, the importance of play in learning, her vision for the future of education, and much more. And now I'm delighted to share my conversation with Colleen Russell-Rawlins. Hi, Colleen. Welcome to the Education Matters podcast. Where does this podcast find you today?
Hi, Jason. Great to be with you. I'm coming to you from Toronto, Ontario, Canada.
Excellent. So just quote unquote down the street from me. That takes 45 minutes for me to get to you, but that might be a topic for another day. So thanks so much for joining. Can you I would have given you a proper introduction at this point, but can you give the audience a brief overview of you and your work?
Thank you, Jason. I am the Director of Education at the Toronto District School Board in Toronto, Ontario, Canada, and I have the pleasure of serving just under 250,000 students who attend schools and programs right across the city in our public education system in over 582 schools. So I'm really privileged to work with amazing educators who make learning come to life for students from the age of 3.8 to 75 plus in our continuing education programs.
Well, TDSB is certainly one of the major institutions in Toronto for sure, Ontario, and dare I say the country. So I do want to dive into understanding what it means to, be the head of such a large school board with so many things going on. But as I like to do, I would like to start with a little bit of your personal background. So can you tell me, where and when did you grow up?
Well, I always start off by centering myself that I'm not just the director of education, I'm the director because of education. I grew up in Scarborough, which is a community in the East End of the city of Toronto. So I'm a product of the system that I currently serve. And that really lives within me each and every day in how I think about what education needs to be to create possibilities for our students and our families. I grew up in Scarborough, which was then just sort of, an extension of the downtown core that was hard to get to. Sadly, still a little tricky to get to through transportation, public transportation. And so it was a suburban neighborhood that mostly, new immigrant families moved to, still is today, the home for newcomers. Predominantly in our city. And so my cousins and I, along with my family, lived in the East End, and I attended public schools and graduated from public schools in Scarborough.
So how, you mentioned your friends and your cousins, how did you all play as children?
Oh, that's such a great question. I often think about this because as I drive through the city, I see children playing, whether it's in my own neighborhood or in schoolyards. I have the fondest memories of, working with my mom and trying to get her to give me permission to go outside, and then getting on my bike and literally being out for hours with my friends on our bikes, riding through probably some places we shouldn't have been, near creeks, catching tadpoles, trying to figure out how we could keep them, engaging in imaginative play. So I remember at one point, I think I was about 10, and my bicycle was a car, and I chose a Trans Am. And so, we'd call our bikes certain types of cars, and really just create the cities that we wanted to live in and imagine who we might be as adults or as superheroes. I have a real love for science fiction. And so, there were times when we were pretending about being in space and different adventures that we might have. We spent a lot of time in the schoolyard doing a variety of different things after school. So those are some of the activities that I engaged in as a young person. I remember being outside all year round.
Oh, I love that. And this is dovetailing nicely with an emerging theme, or at least I want it to be an emerging theme about the bicycle and freedom, because yes. So many of the guests so far have talked about that. And I remember that. I remember that bike being my ticket to freedom and to meeting new kids in the neighborhood. On that note, a lot of folks that are listening to this may not have grown up in such a cosmopolitan city like Toronto. Do you have any memories of where your friends and community were from? You like, was it super diverse? Any kind of recollections of the type of people you grew up around?
Great question. We moved a couple of times as a child. Firstly, we were sort of in the south end of Scarborough, and I attended a large elementary school of approximately 800 students. And I was among 4 Black identifying students in the school. This is a time when racial name calling, and sadly that still permeates, our school and our city, was fairly common. Having said that, I remember having friends who were not Black, but also finding real home with other Black kids. And I think there was one other family, my friend Solve and her brothers. And so we had a fond connection. So that's my first sort of memory of difference. And my mom and grandmother had sort of prepared me for that before I entered school, and how to navigate racism, but also how to recognize that there were going to be good people who are not Black that I could make friends with and learn from. So that's sort of my earliest experience. And then when we moved further north to Agincourt, my grade 4 class had just the most diverse group of students. And I spent a lot of time with William, who's a Chinese Canadian, Mohammed, who identified as Muslim, and Gary, another Black Caribbean student, and others in my classroom. So, there, for me, that was my first opportunity to get to know people who really identified differently than I did. But also just as kids, you connect on a different level, right? What do you like? We like science fiction, so our play outside could be that we cared about our schoolwork and helping each other and how we might work together in groups. We shared books. We told jokes at recess time. We joined similar sports teams. So, yes, I knew they were different and had perhaps different cultural traditions and experiences. But as kids, we move past that very quickly to what our likes are and our friendships.
And to freedom on bikes, I'm sure.
Yes, I remember that they had bikes as well.
Yeah. Is there anything about your upbringing that you wish children today could experience?
Jason, about a year ago, I was leaving a school, and I remember this so profoundly. And as I walked out the door after my school visit, it was a middle school, I looked around and I saw, 5 students hovered around a laptop, because apparently you can get Wi-Fi outside too, and others with phones in their hands, but not really speaking to each other. There was a group off in the distance sort of playing soccer. I thought, oh, I recognize that. But I was surprised by the number of students who were congregating around technology and who weren't speaking to each other. And as I think back to my childhood, we were always engaged with each other, whether we were playing handball or tossing the ball in the back, or even just sitting around and talking to each other on the colas. There was a human interaction. There was relationship building. And I worried that maybe there wasn't the same kind of relationship building happening. So for me, what I really would love is for students to engage in sort of that creative free play where you have to problem solve. When you get to the creek and you scrape your knee and you want to save the tadpole in your hand, but you've got to take it home to your parents. You probably didn't know that you were at the creek. Like, there's problem solving you need to do to make all of that work with your friends, given what they want to do as well in that negotiation. And I'd love for our young people to have that opportunity to be out in nature, to be engaged in regular physical activity, to have to problem solve and communicate with each other in order to build relationships and have new experiences. I'm not saying that's not happening. I think as adults, as caregivers, as parents, we need to ensure that among our play dates that we plan for kids, that we also give them opportunities to be outside on their own, independently, and engaged in free play.
Yeah, I think that's a wonderful point. And if I could add to that, I'd say they need to be bored. Like the devices prevent boredom, which inhibits imaginative play. Like, out of sheer boredom, the number of games and the networks we build just not to be bored were incredible. And so I think a lot of our listeners would agree. And I the only thing I would want to point out is that this isn't the same kind of nostalgia of past generations for the good old times. I think there really is fundamentally something being lost by kids having a completely mediated upbringing. And I just listened to a podcast with Ezra Klein and Zadie Smith, and it's fantastic. Her talking about why she only has a flip phone and doesn't allow that kind of mediation into her life, which I highly recommend. So with that, can you tell me a little bit more about what aspects of your actual education and learning stand out for you? And maybe if I could ask that question a slightly different way, when it comes to learning, what did you really first love?
Oh, that's an easy question for me. Reading.
Hmm.
You spoke about the importance of imagination and where do you turn when you're bored and your family's not entertaining you and you don't have anything else that you think you can do. For me, it was go to books. So reading was my gateway to another world, to better understand the world and to better understand myself. I brought that into school. So I think since I was probably 10 years old, I was the library helper, always had this incredible connection with librarians throughout my school career, especially the head librarian at Albert Campbell Collegiate, where I graduated, who would put aside books for me that she knew I would like to read, probably let me bring back books a little later than I should have, past the due date. But reading has opened for me something that's been fundamental to my career, and that is a love of learning. It's where I go when I need answers. It's where I go when I need to understand something more than I do. You've piqued my interest, so I'll go and look for a book, or now, of course, a podcast. Or an online video that can help me to understand the world around me and people, that can really push my thinking. And that began through, my mother taking me to the library on a regular basis and challenging me not just to go to the series I was interested in, but to maybe ask the librarian or ask another student. I remember I was outraged when she told me at 8 to ask the child that was sitting on the floor in the corner of the library what book they were reading, and maybe I might be interested in it, and they might give me a recommendation. How could I ask another child that I didn't know for a recommendation? But that's really, I think, taught me to think differently and to read outside of my areas of interest in order to keep understanding the world around me and to engage in a kind of playfulness with what the world could be.
Did your family encourage you to study and to read? Was that something that's part of the family dynamic?
I think my mother would be upset with you by using the word encourage. It was demanded.
Well done, Mom. Well done. Yeah.
No option there. It was demanded. There was a study schedule. Let me be clear about that. Homework needed to be done preferably before she arrived home, and certainly before I went outside to play for the evening, if I was allowed to do that. So it was taken very seriously, and my mother was always there alongside me to assist if I struggled. So yeah, education was prioritized in my family. My mother, as the first among her siblings to attend university. So she came with an understanding of school and a success in school that enabled her to pass that along to me. And so I was very privileged in that way.
What did she study?
English and geography. She's still one of the smartest women I know.
Yeah, wonderful. And where did she go?
Calgary. So can you imagine going from the Caribbean?
No, I can't.
Calgary.
Already, I can't. No, I can't. Wow. And to study literature and geography, wonderful. Yeah. So we have that similarity in that our parents kind of didn't make it optional to be a reader young and to go to school. Was in my life growing up, university was never as something that was discussed as an option. It was kind of discussed as what you do. And my parents made it painfully clear that you go to university to learn how to think and not specifically for a job. If you learn how to think, you'll always find a job. And I feel like that discourse is at best muddled now. What was that dynamic like for you?
Well, I think I experienced the opposite. you go to university to get a good job. And I
Mm-hmm.
remember in my first or second year of university, a professor being so frustrated with the class for some reason. And he sat on the table at the front and said, "You're not here just to get a degree and go out into the work world. You're not here to just regurgitate what I'm sharing with you in these lectures. You're here to think. You're here to challenge. Don't ever just accept what someone tells you. Think about it. Do you agree? Do you disagree? Why? Be prepared to have that kind of open discussion. And the world needs critical thinkers." So, and I think he dismissed us. He was so disgusted with us. He dismissed us for the day. And that really changed the way I thought about education and what I needed to do in order to really get the most from my education. So that experience created the shift that I think your parents, the framework that your parents provided you with before you went to university. But I'm really grateful that I had that experience, as I'm sure you are too.
Mm-hmm. So what did you study that maybe at this point or even before that most impacted, really how you think now and, maybe influences also how you work today?
Well, my first degree is in psychology. And if I had to do it over again, I think I would take political science.
Yeah, I'm a big poli-sci guy too. I have that. I have that I may have done that too, but psychology is a useful degree for sure.
The two courses that really sort of shaped how I engage with the world and with people would be first or second year poli-sci course that talked about how political systems shape relationships and shape the context in which we work and we live. And that we should always, sort of have a pulse on what that is, not what we want it to be, not what people are telling us it should be, but what it is. And that I came from a family that debated politics all the time. So I'm not sure why that was a aha moment for me, but it was. Perhaps it brought the two together, the formal structural way around thinking about political systems with all of the conversations I had been privy to or on the periphery of as a young person. Secondly, in my last year of university, there was a group psychology course, and there were only 8 of us in it. And so we sat knee to knee with the professor, learning how to engage with each other and how to understand each other. It was the most uncomfortable thing. I'm an introvert. People have a hard time believing that, given the nature of the role the roles that I've held. It was the most uncomfortable experience for weeks on end. But it was truly life-changing because I had to think about what discomfort meant to me and how to manage that in order to form relationships with other people.
And, let's be honest, the way you learn is not through being really comfortable. It's just not how the brain works. It's not how our even, emotional system connected to the brain works. And also, you can't hide with 8 students, right? So you have to be prepared. You have to be engaged. You can't come and take a little nap in the back of the class. I've been in a few of those, and I fear too that those are of a bygone era because I think universities cut those classes when they get to, when they don't hit a minimum size, and they were always great learning experiences.
They're under a degree of financial stress that I think has changed some of the dynamics that existed in those smaller classrooms, unless you're going to, a graduate level, a doctoral level, then you may be fortunate enough to be in a class that small. But I want to pick up on your comment about discomfort. we learn when we are pushed beyond the way we are currently thinking and acting and understanding what's happening. I sense that that's in an age where everything comes to us through technology, and it may seem easy, where struggle is glossed over, the end product is valued in many ways, that we, young people, need to know that it's through the frustration, through the trial and error, through the failure, that you actually learned. I'm not, what you see today is a bit of an end product, not the journey, not the multiple times I've tried something and I was unsuccessful or it didn't meet the goals that I had set out. And so I want us to keep talking to people, maybe not even just young people, about the value in the journey, the value in the trial, the learning, incremental learning that happens along the way. It's incredibly valuable.
I think that's a great point and probably a good opportunity to kind of pivot to ask you some questions about some of the most inspiring things you've seen in the classroom. Now, I know for those audience members that might not be familiar with your work, you've been the director and that's superintendent for American colleagues here, of two of the biggest districts in the entire country. And I think very few people have done that. So I know you've had exposure to a ton of diversity in terms of teaching and learning, a ton of diversity in terms of students and principals and teachers. So what, if you could somewhat briefly describe what are the most inspiring things you've seen?
That's been the gift of a career, Jason. As director or superintendent, I have had the opportunity to visit literally hundreds, probably thousands of classrooms. I think education is still the best vocation there is. There are maybe three characteristics, I'd say, of the best classrooms I've visited. They're academically challenging. I think anyone who has met me or worked with me would say, that's predictable that Colleen would say, there's a high level of academic rigor happening in the classroom, recognizing a variety of students' needs. It's culturally relevant and responsive. So it sort of meets students where they are in terms of their identities. And then lastly, it's differentiated and creative. So let me give you an example. There are a number of classrooms I've walked into where I've had to scan the room to find the teacher because the teacher's alongside a group of students while other students are engaged in their own learning and speaking to each other. The peer-to-peer relationships are really strong, but you also know the teacher is engaged with students in terms of pushing their thinking. Inevitably, I hear kids laughing in a way that says that they matter, their teacher matters, their friends matter in the classroom.
That this is also a place of joy.
Exactly. That overall joy, belonging, and engagement, which has been sort of our mission, if I can say that, as a district, is the foundation for academic achievement. You can see and feel that when you walk into these classrooms, whether it's a kindergarten classroom or a grade 12 math classroom. That's a common feature. When you look around the classroom, the environment is intentionally built. It's built to show examples of what the learning is intended to look like as models. It shows a celebration of past learning. You can see the diversity of students' identities, not just racially, but in terms of the way they think, neurodiversity, its languages spoken. They're all meaningfully visible within the room. It's not technologically dependent. There's still a role for pencil and paper, and we know the links between actually writing something down and retaining information, that cognitive process.
Mm-hmm.
And then when I think about the task, one of the tasks that stands out for me and may have some resonance with listeners is, just as we came out of the pandemic, 2 teachers, grade 5 and 10, who knew each other, were working on vaccination rates with their class. And they were asking questions about vaccinations. We know that this became a highly charged public topic, certainly in Ontario and in Toronto, especially. But it started from a place of, how do you, student, feel about vaccinations and why? How does your family feel? And then they were drawing connections between how they felt as individuals, their families felt, and the other students in the classroom, looking for commonalities, regardless of whether or not you agree with vaccinations.
Mm-hmm.
So that idea of starting from what's similar, and then they went into the mathematics. How do you do the community study of vaccination rates?
Mm-hmm.
What kinds of questions are we going to ask? How do we avoid bringing our own biases into how we're examining this question? So whether you're 11 years old or 17 years old, exploring the topic of vaccinations, and using mathematics to understand rates of infection and vaccinations, you're connecting it to yourself, but you're also connecting it to your classroom, to your community, and then to the broader world, and making some recommendations around vaccinations from whatever viewpoint you chose to take up, supported by the mathematics and the scientific information available. And I was just speechless at what 11-year-olds were able to say, and what they were thinking about, and what they were questioning, and what 17-year-olds, who of course went beyond, Toronto and Peel to other places in the world, and lack of access to vaccinations. So that really stands out for me, the questioning, the starting with self, but always looking at commonalities, a willingness to take up different ethical stances as a way of critical thinking, not to tell. It was never to convince you to go home and say to your parents, you should get vaccinated. But it was a way of thinking. Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So
I think that's a really wonderful example. So as a follow-up to that, what are the qualities that you most admire in teachers that can develop these kind of classrooms? And then I think too, some unsung heroes in our system are the principals. So what quality, maybe first of teachers and then of principals, that really, in the very least, create the environment for these really fruitful discussions that build critical thinking and bring the whole person into the conversation?
The teachers who approach teaching the curriculum and teaching our students through a really holistic, cross-curricular approach inevitably think about the world that way themselves. They are deeply committed to students learning. Like, what's the first thing these teachers said to me is, oh, it's a math lesson. No, it's not actually a math lesson. But for me, I really appreciate, in a time when the curriculum may become second for some educators, in order to try and engage students. They're always thinking about the hook. Mm-hmm. These teachers were thinking about, okay, what is it I'm hoping that students will learn, and how do I design it in a really relevant way? They're people who love change. And I know that's going to come as a bit of a surprise, but they would say, yeah, I didn't do this last year, and I don't know if I'd do it again, because I'm thinking about, rates of water usage. that's a topic that's coming up, or, everybody's caught in traffic, so maybe I'll do a traffic study next year. So they're not building lessons that they'll do over and over again. They are very much in touch with what's happening outside of the classroom that might be relevant to students, and bringing that into teaching and learning the different expectations.
I love that. And I maybe want to phrase it a different way for teachers, because it does overlap with something that I've been thinking and talking to folks about. And I love how you phrase that, like open to change. But I also feel that teachers en masse, this is not for everyone, but they need to be more risk taking. Like teachers are such good employees. They don't want to oftentimes, rock the boat. But I kind of point out, it's like, especially in Canada, you guys got great unions. You're allowed to be taking risks in your classroom to teach something different, to do something different. No one, no administrator worth their salt, that at least that I've come across, is going to punish or reprimand a teacher for trying to be really dynamic in how they teach. So I like how you said that, not averse to change. And I think, maybe a younger generation of teachers are more open to change because their whole life has been really one kind of socio-political upheaval after another. But I just wanted to maybe get your thoughts on that articulation of the idea, like take risks. Yeah. Your director is not going to come into your classroom and yell at you for taking risks.
No, I think that there are a number of educators who are moving beyond the curriculum, and I really want to applaud that. They're thinking about, why does this make sense for students? I've never had a parent complain about a teacher who's attempting to make real world connections while also teaching their child what they need to learn in order to have options. So, and that's what I share with teachers. But fundamental to taking risks is caring about all of the students in the classroom and being really open to feedback. So I didn't mention, but parents were very much aware of what the teachers were trying to do. In fact, I think the grade 5 teacher had a virtual meeting with the parents and explained what she was trying to do, because she knew that immediately some parents might say, oh, you're trying to teach my child to take this position or that position. And she wanted to make it really clear that no, it's not about taking a position. It's about critical thinking. It's about learning the mathematics. It's about being open to other people's experiences. And in that way, parents were part of the conversation. So it wasn't even really a risk. It was a way of creating community. And we certainly need our educators to help us create communities, while the adults and the politicians figure out how to do that better than we currently are.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So what advice or what are the most important things for parents to understand about their kids' education? Because I'm part of that group. I have an 11-year-old and a 12-year-old. And I'm including myself in that group. Parents, generally speaking, are out to lunch when it comes to understanding what's happening. And it's not entirely our fault. The classroom still remains, from the parent's perspective, very opaque. It's very hard to know what's going on. Your kids, you can judge their kind of social, emotional well-being. And I'm pretty sure most kids come home and love school and are feel safe for the most part, most kids. But we don't know why that is. We don't know how that is. And then conversely, when they're not having a good time, we're not exactly sure of the dynamics. So again, forgive the sort of long way of asking the question, what would you want parents to really understand about the education system?
I think that's a great question. First of all, having a relationship with your child's teacher is critical. Mm-hmm. we ask educators, and I know that this is complex, and everyone says, I don't do it enough, Colleen, because I don't have the time. But having a relationship before there's a hiccup is really important. And to view parents, and for parents to view educators as partners in raising their children. And that's a scary thing for me to say. It's a scary thing for parents to hear, and probably for teachers to openly acknowledge. But we are sort of co-parenting.
Yeah.
Given that young people spend 6 hours with us, at the elementary level, each and every day. So it's important for us to be able to communicate. I think if you can find a way to communicate in an authentic way, hey, just checking in on how Jason's doing. Is there anything I should know? Similarly, Jason had a great day. I'm wondering about, his friendship with Colleen. Is everything going okay there? Because he seems a little, or
well, they would have told you Jason can't sit still for longer than 10 minutes, but...
and sometimes that's good to know. Like, at home, he only does that with a book in his hand, or at home he does that because, we allow him to bounce around. And then as an educator, I need to be open to, like, how do I make that happen in a classroom for him? So I think that that's the one tangible piece of advice that I would offer to parents and caregivers is try and have an open dialogue with your child's teacher. It doesn't have to be every day, but a check-in to say, how's it going?
I love that idea, Colleen, and you just kind of shifted my perspective, because I think just instinctually as a parent wanting to protect your child, you develop an adversarial, and I don't think it's unconscious. I don't think you want to be adversaries, but it's like, that's my baby, and I know you got 30 others. So, but what are you doing for mine? So, like, that adversarial instinct is there to protect your child. But this idea of pivoting that into a narrative or an understanding of co-parenting, I actually think there's a lot of beauty and value in that idea. So I want to think about that a little bit more.
Could I share something with you?
Please.
Jason, I've had the pleasure of meeting a lot of parents throughout my career. And I've learned a lot from them about not only how to teach their child and to reach their child and to love their child, but that's helped me to love and teach other children. So when you say, Jason needs a little bit more of, is that possible? I learn from that. Especially if we're not adversarial. And I recognize not every parent has had a positive experience at school. And so to reach out to a teacher when you've maybe not had a positive experience with very many teachers throughout your school career takes a lot of emotional effort, takes a lot of emotional labor. I have seen educators cry when a parent says, I know you're really busy. You did this for my child yesterday. Thank you so much. Like, you have no idea how that one little note, email, whatever it is, can change an educator. And similarly, I don't think we know as educators when we say, Jason had a great day today, how that makes a parent feel.
I love that. And that's something I do try to practice, having been raised by two educators, knowing that and spent some time teaching. I don't think it is, but it feels like a thankless job oftentimes. And so, I think that's great advice to listeners, and something I try to practice is to write a little note of gratitude to those teachers, even something small. It's like, my kid came home happy today, or my kid felt safe today, or my kid liked the lesson they did today. I think that goes such a long way, and I know teachers have reciprocated once we've reached out. So I think that's a great piece. Colleen, I do want to kind of pivot for, I think, a big part of the audience that works with large school districts and is also interested in administration and different roles. So you've worked, as I mentioned at the onset, two of the biggest boards in Ontario, two of the biggest in the country, and probably like top 10 in North America, just to give folks context in terms of both staff and students, and probably geography is massive as well. So can you kind of just describe what that's been like?
My goodness, it's been at times the most profound gift, because I feel like I have connections in communities and with staff across the province because of my work at the Peel District School Board and at the Toronto District School Board. It also is challenging because school systems are systems that are intended to replicate outcomes and are bureaucratic and supported by a political governing body. So, they're really, it's not even two sides of a coin. I would say it's probably, it's multidimensional. For me, Jason, it's always been about how you engage all stakeholders in making improvements that actually touch the desks of children. Right? It's drawing that line from the boardroom right to the classroom or the program that the 21-year-old who's coming back to school to upgrade, to provide greater opportunities for themselves and their family. How do we make decisions that have that kind of stretch so that it actually changes outcomes for kids? And we do that in a number of different ways, through policies. We do that through governance structures that are created. We do that through the resources that are allocated. And we do it together. Many people look at me and say, Colleen does that. I wish I could take credit or responsibility, depending on how you feel. But in fact, almost everything we do is done together as staff or as staff working with the governing board, our board of trustees.
So then what would you say are the most important aspects of you leading, creating an initiative or creating policy? Can you give the audience a sense of how that gets done and what you view as the centrality of your role in making, great education policy come to fruition in such big districts?
The first most important task of a director or superintendent is helping the Board of Trustees to develop their multi-year strategic plan priorities. Ours are achieve, belong, thrive, and revitalize school environments and working environments. That provides sort of the guiding principles of what it is you're trying to do in order to make better outcomes and experiences for young people. So all policy to me is rooted in those strategic directions that are established by the Board of Trustees through broad scale community engagement. So any idea that comes sometimes from parents, sometimes from students, sometimes from educators, that will turn into a policy direction has to be rooted in one of those strategic directions. Where the director of education's role, I think, is central, is often determining, should it be a priority at this time, given what we're able to achieve and the resources that are available. We're in a time when everyone has a need that they feel should be met through public service, and rightfully so. But that does mean that there are a plethora of priorities and urgent issues to attend to. So the director working with the Board of Trustees and or senior staff has a responsibility to look for commonalities and to make very challenging decisions, again, with groups, about where will we put the bulk of our resources, because we can't achieve multiple priorities, but we can certainly look for priorities that will touch the widest group possible.
So you mentioned, the work central to the whole process of working with trustees, and the TDSB has, correct me if I'm wrong, 21 trustees? 22 trustees, shortchanged it by one. I apologize for that. Can you describe for the audience what that work entails?
Well, we have a board or committee meeting once a week, sometimes twice a week, and that's an opportunity for our governing board, largely a policy board for members of the audience who are members of boards out in communities. It's largely a policy board, and they have an opportunity to hear from community and also to hear reports from staff and to make decisions and monitor the work that we're doing to achieve the multi-year strategic plan. As director, what's key for me is ensuring that we're giving trustees the kind of information that allows them to make informed decisions with respect to policy and the allocation of resources, and to provide us with concrete feedback that allows us to improve our service across the system.
So one of the things that, always was a bit confusing to me is that I truly believe in public oversight and democratic oversight, and that is the real value of a trustee board that deals with policy. But there's a bit of a conflict in my mind anyway, that most folks that are now involved in developing policy, approving policy, don't necessarily have an education background. Do you find that problematic? Or maybe another way to ask the question is is there enough support for these democratically elected officials to understand a bit of the history of education and, the work that you've been doing over the last 20 years, so they don't kind of necessarily land and think they have all the solutions to the problems because they've been a successful businessman or woman or what have you?
I think it's a both and. Trustees, like other politicians, are elected from the community, from those who choose to run, and so they do not normally bring an understanding of the education system as someone who has worked as a professional or paraprofessional within either the operations or the academic sectors of education. In one way, that is a strength. It keeps their thinking at a high policy level, not at a, we should actually have 3 generators in that building, not 2, because I did that in my previous career. So they're not technical in that way. And then there are times when boards are making decisions based on the information provided to them by staff. And I do want to stress that. So they do get background on issues from staff that feel like they are decisions that should belong to educators or people who have worked within education or studied education. The system doesn't afford our elected trustees the opportunity to receive learning, to be part of professional learning that I think they would acknowledge would help them to be even more effective in their role as elected members of a board of trustees. So if we wanted to improve the system, I think one of the ways we could do it within the current structure would be to recognize that more professional learning needs to happen before they take on their role, they swear their oath, and then throughout the term. And that, I think, would provide them with the kind of information and background and understanding that would augment their decision making.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. And I'm starting, at least from my network, to hear that this is happening more because of the impact of AI. So this could be like and I don't really want to get into AI right now, but one of the potential beneficial impacts of AI is people realize like no one knows about this stuff and we've got to get educated. So they're starting to have these kind of programs, or at least having speakers come talk to them about how AI can impact education, both in negative, positive, and maybe everything in between kind of way. And I hope that also leads to a kind of hunger in those individuals to maybe set up a system where it's like, okay, well, we don't know a lot about AI. We don't know a lot about literacy right now as well, and numeracy, and then all these other initiatives. So maybe it could open the door for that kind of learning. What would you say that you wish more people understood about the superintendent role or director role?
I'm going to answer this question in perhaps an unusual way. That we're human beings. I think often there's a conflation between the organizations that we represent and the people that we are. Many of our staff, our community members want to engage with us, but they engage with us as if we are the inanimate object of the building that we work in most often, not as human beings. And the reason that I say that is education is a community and it is a human endeavor. And so if you approach the director of education as a human being, you are increasing accountability. You're moving from politics to people, to humanity, to relationships. And it's through relationships that we actually better understand each other. The problems that are being faced individually or collectively, and we are more likely to come to solutions or at least make progress. But when interactions are approached as you're a figurehead or just a symbol of an organization, I think there are missed opportunities for connection, and those missed opportunities actually erode my ability, our ability as superintendents or directors to serve the communities. And I don't know anyone who doesn't want to better serve communities.
I also think that's wonderfully put. So if I can ask you to be very human and be proud of your work for a moment, what are some of the initiatives that over the years that you're most proud of and that you're happy to champion?
Oh, I've been fortunate in that. I think through, I've held 5 different senior leadership roles over the course of my career, that I've touched a number of different things. A couple stand out for me. Perhaps I'll connect it to your previous question. I'll talk about something that the provincial government started over a decade ago. There were 100 schools in the Toronto District School Board whose results were less than 75% on our literacy and math provincial assessments. The government recognized these schools across Ontario. TDSB just happened to have 100 of our 400 plus. So about a quarter of our elementary schools at that time fell into that category. The government provided us with financial resources as well as professional resources to improve literacy and numeracy over a 3-year period. I was able to work with teams to create the kind of system, our approach to continuous improvement and pedagogy in classrooms, that ultimately yielded 96 of those 100 schools over 3 years, raising their achievement to above 75%. And I point that out because it demonstrates what's possible when you align priorities at a district, at a provincial level, at a district level, resources, and maintain the focus and engage teams in learning from and with each other in the service of children's learning. And that really has been pivotal. And for me as director, that's what I try and replicate as we work on different priorities across the district connected to our multi-year strategic plan. So my roots in literacy are long. And so there are a number of literacy interventions that are in place because of the work that early years teams have done and literacy teams have undertaken over the last number of years that I'm immensely proud of. They are having impact in the schools in which they are placed. We're not yet at universality, but that's our goal, to ensure that there are interventions in place that recognize learners' needs across all of our schools. We have systematically looked at how special education may be a barrier for some of our students. So automatic identification of often boys, often racialized boys, as having special education needs at a young age, which means they're probably never going to be exposed to the curriculum at that grade level. We've tried to interrupt that and to really look at how we can change programming to support their learning needs and not immediately suggest that they need special education. A number of our students who have exceptionalities used to learn in a separate classroom, and now they are integrated into a mainstream classroom. We're not at a perfect model yet. We're doing some reevaluation of how to better support the needs of those students in their regular homeroom classroom placement, but I think it's a step in the right direction. We've moved into our one-to-one device strategy so that all of our students from grade 5 on have a board allocated device that they can use during school time and take home. I'm really proud of that. The pandemic spurred that on, I think, but we've been able to maintain that. And we can see in our results that the dip that occurred after the pandemic in students' well-being and connections at school are now back to pre-pandemic levels. And that provides us with, I think, the foundation to continue to grow students' well-being. So those are just some of the results that I'm proud of. I could go on and on.
Well, I'm sure with the kind of career you've had, you've been part of many of these initiatives. So I'm always curious to ask somebody like you with this kind of experience, like how you see the future of education. And I'd like to push it out to a indeterminate time. Like I'm fuzzy beyond 2 years at this stage in my life and the way society's going, but really like push it out to 50 years out, which kind of gives you time to make things happen or for things to completely fall apart. How do you view education in 50 years from now?
Well, I hope it's unrecognizable. I hope that in many ways, if we were able to, see the world through some portal, we would say, I'd say, Jason, is that a school? Like, is that learning that's happening there
Formal
as opposed
learning,
to the building? Like I'm hoping that we would ask questions because we wouldn't recognize all of the structures and systems that exist now and perhaps aren't working that well for many of our students for a variety of different reasons. So this is a bit of freedom dreaming to draw from Dr. Bettina Love. I think it'll be shaped by technology. I'm hoping that it will be infused with a deeper understanding of human relationships, as well as rooted in Indigenous knowledges, ways of being, and a connection to the environment in which we are right now. So AI driven, I think that learning decisions, both in terms of content, personalization, cultural relevancy, connecting to the neurodiversity of our students, that AI will augment that tremendously and create a kind of personalized learning system that really allows learners, students, to engage fully and completely. Imagine being able to teach Indigenous languages through AI.
Mm-hmm.
And what that might offer not only to Indigenous communities, but to Canadians.
And even to preserve Indigenous languages.
Exactly.
They're all dialects and languages that are not, the several main ones are disappearing. So I think that's a wonderful vision. You kind of, in that answer, answered one of my other questions, which if you had a magic wand, how would you change education? But it sounds like you're already giving me that vision. But anything in particular, like if you could just, make everybody travel for 1 month a year to a different country as part of their education. I mean, anything. Is there anything you would do with that magic wand?
I think you know me well enough to know that I would probably say achieving equity of access and outcome would be my first priority. We can't truly have excellent public education system until there are equitable outcomes. I think we know what's not happening and what needs to happen. So if I could, wave a magic wand, that would be among the first things that I would do. The second would be to take learning out of the classroom. Are there opportunities to learn in the outdoors, to go up north, to learn in communities that are different from the one that you live in now, and to do that in a really respectful, honoring, connected way.
A genuine way.
Exactly. An authentic and a respectful way. Are there opportunities to learn in industries? I live not too far away from a place that makes cookies and children's treats. I can only imagine what you can learn there and how that might capture the imagination of students, from those who want to learn the chemistry of cooking to those who want to learn the systems that produce the consistency of this, these cookies. Like there's so many ways we could open up.
Engineering diabetes.
Exactly. So that would be, I think, another wish that would really engage students, because we know our secondary students are asking, why am I learning this? And is this really meaningful? So that connection to the real world is going to be pivotal to keep them engaged.
Yeah, I think that's another great answer. So, Colleen, we are at time, but my last question is always, what podcast, book, video, movie, album, piece of content, let's say, would you recommend to the audience?
I've always been a fan of Trevor Noah. And so I've been listening to his podcast, What's Next? And I mean, the topics range from the American election to, freedom dreaming around, if you could change the world, what would you change and why? For me, it's an exercise in critical thinking. And it's always done with humor, and intellect, but also deep respect for human beings. So
well, with that, Colleen, thank you very much. Pleasure talking to you.
Thank you, Jason. It's been wonderful.
This podcast is recorded on the Territory and Treaty 13 lands of the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation and on the traditional territory of the Huron-Wendat and the Haudenosaunee. The show is edited and produced by the marvelous and talented Andrew Mastroianni. If you like what you're hearing, make sure you subscribe to us on Spotify or wherever you listen to your podcast. Until next time, remember, there's absolutely no inevitability as long as there's a willingness to contemplate what's happening. I'm your host, Jason Bucheri. Until next time.